Okay, so let's move on to our first question. If I can just scroll up here.
Jerry Malombi.
Thanks.
Yeah, who's Jerry's question?
Jerry, would you like to ask it yourself, or would you want me to read it out?
I can ask it myself, Ivan. Yeah,
Great.
just the Council of State that was set up after partition. Did it meet, or did it do any collaboration between then and when the trouble started? Frankly, I've never heard of it. So the Council of State, yeah.
It was officially called the Council of Ireland.
Council of Ireland, yeah.
Yeah, and it was set up theoretically by the Government of Ireland Act, but it never met, simply because Southern Ireland, of course, as we know, was a dead letter, and it never met. It was also part of the Anglo-Irish Treaty the following year. Lloyd George introduced or reintroduced the Council of Ireland as a device, as a sop of what Arthur Griffith used to call the essential Irishness of the treaty. That is, that it gave some sort of symbolic recognition of the unity of Ireland. And Lloyd George, when Arthur Griffith suggested this, went for it because he knew that, in effect, it was symbolic, that the Unionists would never, ever participate in it. And like the Council of Ireland set up by the Government of Ireland Act the previous year, so the Council of Ireland set up by the Anglo-Irish Treaty a year later was equally a non-runner, and it never met ever. And did you know there was a third Council of Ireland as well? Now, this is a trick question. It wasn't in the 1920s. You have to fast forward, 50 years.
The Anglo-Irish Agreement?
No, even before the Anglo-Irish Agreement.
Sunningdale, was it?
Yes, hooray. Yeah, congratulations, whoever said Sunningdale. That's exactly what it was. Apparently, in 1973, the Tory government's attempt, again, to resolve the Northern Ireland question involved power sharing in the north, and it also involved, at the behest of the SDLP, John Hume in particular wanted this. They revived the Council of Ireland. But again, all it did was to aggravate the Unionists, who refused to take part in it. And the Council of Ireland from 1973 never, ever met either. So the Council of Ireland had three chances of establishing itself, but all three chances fell by the board in 1920, 1921, and then again in 1973. I suppose the modern equivalent of it would be Strand 3, isn't it, of the current Good Friday Agreement, north-south interrelationships. That would be the modern version, although the Unionists, again, true to form, excuse me, jump back a mile if anybody talks about the prospect of any north-south discussions under the Good Friday Agreement in any way leading to any discussion of constitutional change between north and south. So nothing changes. 100 years ago, it's exactly the same. 100 years later, it's exactly the same as we speak.
Okay, thanks, Ivan.
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Ivan. Okay, let's move to a question that was in the chat bar. Teresa says, there was a very interesting documentary recently on Channel 5 about the role that Lord Louis played in the partition of India. And it made me wonder if the fact that Ireland was partitioned influenced in any way the decisions that were made around India.
Well, in the opening chapter of my book, look, I know people have got strong opinions about partition, and the strongest of those opinions implies, and I say implies because I don't necessarily agree with it, that it was part of a nefarious, well thought out plot by British imperialism to divide and rule, you know, giving the examples of Ireland, Palestine, India, Pakistan, etc. What I say in my book is that, like everything else, or a lot to do with the way the British government, and not all British governments operate, is that it was a wing and a prayer. Basically, they were scared stiff of the alternative if they didn't introduce partition. Partition was a pragmatic, short-term initiative to get over a local difficulty, which they hoped by batting it into the long grass. And nobody expected partition to last them. Even the Unionists didn't expect partition to last 100 years. They didn't expect it to last 10 years. But it was a device by Lloyd George, the arch political pragmatist, to basically get rid of a problem in the short term, because the alternatives, and the alternative could have included, you know, it may sound, you know, fantastic 100 years on, it could have included the UVF entering into civil war with the IRA. And Lloyd George was very, very conscious of this possibility. And as a result, partition was his attempt to resolve on a temporary basis an avoidance of that sort of conflict taking place. I suppose it all depends on whether or not you believe that the UVF's threat would ever have been realized. If you believe that they would have taken up arms against the British, and they would have taken up arms against the Irish Republicans, you can see the logic of partition, keeping the two sides apart. If you believe that it was all a bluff and that the British government gave into this bluff, well, that will be another argument that partition was basically the British government caving in to the Conservatives and also their Unionist allies in the northeast of Ireland. But I don't think partition was part of a great imperialist British plot which covered most of the 20th century in widely flung parts of the British Empire. I don't agree with that.
Thank you, Ivan. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Somebody here, Jill Nickliam, would like to know a date, and that's the date that the 500 people were killed in the north, where there was fighting.
Yeah, it's estimated that over 500 people were killed in the period between July 1920, which started with gun battles in Derry between the UVF and the IRA. On the streets of the centre of the city of Derry. It was, you know, you can imagine, I mean, you know, 15 people were killed over the course of a week. And the British forces and the RAC, as it was, simply withdrew from the area. But from that period, sectarian warfare, because that's what it was, escalated, culminating in early 1921, when, hundreds of people were expelled from the shipyards, mostly Catholics, some liberal Protestants as well, by elements of the UVF. And what you'll find is that the sectarian outbreaks occur in waves. It's not incessant all the way through during that 12-month period. It rises and falls. So, for example, in response to the assassination by the IRA in County Cork, I think it was, of a senior RIC superintendent from Lisbon, County Antrim. So that led directly to the UVF attacking Catholics in Lisbon, Dromore, Banbridge, and other Protestant areas around Belfast. So it was a reaction to what was perceived by the UVF, and in particular ordinary random Protestants as well, who were alienated by it, the excesses of the IRA elsewhere in Ireland, in the south and west of Ireland. But it was the largest number of people that were killed in the whole of Ireland during a one-year period throughout the whole of the 19th and the 20th centuries, the sectarian killings in mainly Belfast, not exclusively Belfast, in this period that we were talking about.
Thank you, Ivan. Okay, we've got a question all the way from Brazil. It's a question from Sophia, and she thanks you for the fantastic presentation. and asks you, I'd love to hear Ivan speak a bit as to what he thinks Brexit will mean for Ireland, the north of Ireland, going forward.
Oh, God.
Look with that.
Keyword.
Oh, can I not pass on this
No,
one?
you don't.
Well,
No.
What is there to say? I mean, you know, I have to say, I wrote a little book a couple of years ago. Excuse me. This frog has taken up permanent residence in my throat, and no amount of water seems to help. But excuse me. I wrote in that book about the possibilities of the Brexit issue actually leading to an increase in the chances of a united Ireland. But like everybody else, I was completely wrong-footed when the backstop almost overnight, in fact, it was literally overnight, wasn't it, in September 2019, disappeared to be replaced by the border in the Irish Sea, which our current Prime Minister agreed in the meeting up in Liverpool there with Leo Varadkar when he was a Taoiseach. So what does that mean now? Well, it looks like the backstop, such as it is, will continue. There won't be any, well, the backstop's now redundant, isn't it? Because there won't be any cross-border checks, it seems, as a result of Boris Johnson's agreement there with Leo Varadkar. What it means in terms of a border in the Irish Sea, undermining the constitutional position of Northern Ireland inside the United Kingdom, we'll just have to wait and see. But I will say that it has severely embarrassed and wrong-footed the DUP in particular, who were avid anti-European, very, very strong pro-Brexiteers, and then were basically left high and dry by the deal that their erstwhile ally, the current Prime Minister, agreed with the Irish Taoiseach 15 months ago. So we have to wait and see.
thank you. Nolette or Fiona, can we go over to anyone who's asking for questions, please?
Yeah, I've got one from Anne Kirby. Similar question to Sophia's. Ivan, how do you envisage the relationship changing between the UK and Ireland after December 31st this year?
What, constitutionally or?
Anne, would you like to elaborate? If you'd like to unmute yourself.
I just have a worry that it's not going to be good. You know, our relationship with Ireland, certainly if we get no deal.
Well, I mean, constitutionally, I mean, I don't think there's any question of any changes taking place. No. I don't see any likelihood of, in the near future, a border poll being established. And for the foreseeable future, dangerous thing to say, I can't see any change in the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. But I mean, I don't think it's going to change after December the 31st, because I think the damage has been done. The damage has been done between the relationship of Britain and Ireland between 2016 and the present, particularly over the big debates and controversies over Brexit, in which certain British politicians actually showed their ignorance, to put it mildly, of the situation in Ireland, and showed that a lot of them have a certain residual anti-Irishness, which dates back historically to the period we're talking about, if not before. Equally, I have to say, in the interest of balance, I think there are politicians in Ireland, and not only the usual suspects, sort of Sinn Féin, who have taken advantage of the difficulties, let's say, between Britain and Ireland over Brexit to actually beat the green drum by showing themselves to be, or attempting to show themselves as being more nationalist by attacking the British on the issue of Brexit. And I do think that each side should in particular, and I hope they will, actually, you know, row back a bit and actually look at the fact that irrespective of what happens outside of the European Union for Britain, that Britain and Ireland are geographically going to be in the same position 100 years from now as they are at the moment. And we've got to do more than just live with it. We've actually got to try and revive the positive relationship between Britain and Ireland, which certainly existed. And it wasn't that long time ago when the Queen went over to Ireland and President Michael D. Higgins came here. It's less than 10 years, and look at what's happened over the intervening 10 years. It's very, very depressing. Anyway.
Let's move. We have John Hutchinson. John, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Also a message from Kevin Rogers. If Kevin, I don't know if Kevin would like to ask it himself.
Unmute yourself, John.
Hello. What's the question you want me to ask?
You put one in the chat. Would you want me to read it out for you?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, so you asked, will we see United Ireland visit Yes through Irish border poll referendum in 2025 or 2030 or 2035?
2035.
Reason is because Northern Ireland comes out officially in January 2021. Even Northern Ireland votes remain in European Union referendum.
Yeah.
So basically, you're asking, will we see the reunification of Ireland in the short to medium term, and will this be accelerated by what we've just been talking about, the controversies over Brexit? Is that what you're saying? But do I believe that will happen?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and also the census figures. Yeah. The census figures are going up. I think the next census figures, it could be the first time the Catholics could be the majority in 2022. That's what they reckon, because the Catholic population have more children than the Protestant population. That's what I noticed.
Yeah, no, I accept the demographic argument. In fact, Catholics and Protestants are meant to be at equal levels, ironically, next year on the 100th anniversary of the creation of Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
But, and it is a big but, are we talking about a united Ireland that's going to be established on the basis of a sectarian headcount? So that if there are 1,000 Catholics more than Protestants, that will result in a united Ireland. And is that the sort of way forward? Personally, I'd say it isn't.
Okay.
And I have to say, towards the end of the book, there, I mean, you can do it.
Maybe special status only solve it, but the unions are not too keen on it, are they?
Well, what sort of a constitutional arrangement do we want in Ireland? I know a lot of people will say, Irish nationalists obviously will say reunification.
Yeah.
But no thought goes into what that reunification is going to entail. And it could be, just counting the numbers of Catholics and counting the number of Protestants. Although I've got to say that you shouldn't, I'm not saying you are, but, we shouldn't automatically assume.
That's come from Irish nationalist family, the Falls Road. They're for United Ireland, therefore.
Yeah. But not all Catholics are nationalists.
No. Yeah.
Not all Protestants are unionists. And I was reading recently, and I hadn't appreciated this, a substantial number of the Catholic population in Northern Ireland are Lithuanians and Poles and people like that. Yeah. And I don't see how, necessarily they're going to be committed towards the sort of the romantic, commitment to a united Ireland. I think that the issue is far too complicated than just looking at it in terms of Protestants and Catholics. And the other thing is, it's 20 years since the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah.
And we have to ask ourselves, what movement has there been forward in actually ensuring that the differences between people who live in Northern Ireland have been resolved, until you actually get a movement towards a more fairer, equal, more tolerant Northern Ireland, of which there's very little examples at the moment. You shouldn't be thinking in terms of a united Ireland. Now, I accept
I think Sinn Féin could do well in the next Irish election. They could win because they've done a lot of austerity in Southern Ireland. I think they appealed to the people, the poorest in Ireland. They did well in the last election. The vote, it was popular vote, they won the popular vote, but they didn't just think in. But if they had more people standing, they might have gone a coalition with someone.
Yeah, you've alluded to the point that any referendum on a united Ireland isn't just going to be limited to people who live in Northern Ireland. The people in the south,
being south voter as well,
have to agree to it as well.
Yes,
and
right, yeah.
You know, it's an open question, I would have thought,
yes,
as to whether or not who would want to take on the troublemakers in Northern Ireland.
Well, talking of troublemakers, the next person is we've got John Hutchinson for you. So, John, would you like to ask a question?
Well, basically, obviously, the theme of your talk and your book is about the partition of Ireland and what happened at that time. We seem to have moved on quite a long way to the present time and what we can do about the present situation. As the late, great John Hume, with whom I went to school, said he was an accident of birth. And I'm saying the same thing. For years and years, I've said, I'm an accident of birth. I'm a Catholic, but I'm an accident of birth. I was born a Catholic. But my people would have probably been symptomatic of Croppies Lie Down, because they would not allow John Hutchinson to raise his head and get embroiled in anything that might suggest trouble. They wanted peaceful lives, and they mixed quite freely with the Protestant community. We had great friends amongst those. So I'm concerned that in your talk and in the book, I hope, there's no mention at all of the lack of involvement by the Catholic Church, the religious leaders of the church, the Christian churches, the bitterness of the Orange Order, and the Protestant bitterness that's been created as a result of that, and what influence they could have had for good if they had raised their heads. And did they raise their heads during the period of troubles leading up to and beyond partition? I'm not so sure that they did. I'm not so sure that the Catholic Church, of whom I'm a participant, I'm not sure that the Catholic Church did enough to help to create a situation that had to be created by politicians and, unfortunately, by the paramilitaries.
No, I'd agree. I'd agree with you there. If we go back to the period that we were talking about, you know, after the First World War, both churches, so to speak, both Protestants and Catholics, I know there's more than two, actually retreated into their own sort of sectarian bolt holes, and the Catholic Church basically saw itself as the arbiter between Sinn Féin and the Home Rulers, to the extent that they actually decided which of Sinn Féin and which of the Irish Home Rule Party should contest elections in the north of Ireland in the 1918 general election. Equally, it's got to be said, you know, the Orange Order, yes, it reverted back to what it was good at, and that is, you know, the religious, side of the Protestant community with strong influence. And I'd agree with you when you say that, you know, none of them showed actual leadership above and beyond catering for their own sectarian interests in the period that we're talking about. It's unfortunate, but that's the case.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so can we come to David Weston now, please? David, would you like to ask your question?
Oh, yes, just going back to earlier, the Boundary Commission.
Yes.
Whatever became of the Boundary Commission? Because at some stages it was meant to probably unify the country at some stage, or redivide the 6 counties into 2 further counties into the south and 4 remaining unionist.
Right. Well, if you read chapters 5 and 6 of my book, the politics of the Irish Boundary Commission, and then the recommendations of the Irish Boundary Commission, it's looked at in detail. But it's a valid point. I said earlier on that Northern Ireland was created by the Government of Ireland Act, and it withstood the vicissitudes of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, in which Collins and Griffith tried to get the British to basically do away with the Government of Ireland Act, and by extension to do away with Northern Ireland. And the only thing that Lloyd George would agree with, in order again to give a fig leaf, a symbol of essential Irish unity, was the establishment of a boundary commission, which would then negotiate and look at actually passing parts of Northern Ireland, and it's got to be said, the south, across the border, in order to make it a more amenable, because the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, nobody could claim that it was actually representative of people who lived there. 1/3 of the population was nationalist and wanted to be part of the Irish Free State. And the Boundary Commission gave the impression that it would transfer large parts of Tyrone, Fermanagh, etc., Derry City, etc., to the Free State, in the hope and expectation, unrealistic, I believe, of the Free State, that in fact Northern Ireland would implode upon itself because it would become unviable. The Boundary Commission was delayed for 3 years. It didn't start meeting until 1924, 1925. And the reason it was delayed is because A, the Irish Civil War from 1922 to 1923, and the Irish Free State gave the impression that if it couldn't actually guarantee that it would be in charge of its own territory, what right did it have to actually claim the territory of a neighbouring state, so that there was no likelihood of the Boundary Commission meeting during the Irish Civil War. But also Craig and the Unionists point blank refused to participate in the Boundary Commission. In the end, it was set up by the British government in 1924, 1925. It actually assiduously travelled through, in particular, border regions, and made some very, very interesting proposals. For example, to transfer South Armagh to the Irish Free State, but equally it made some controversial proposals as well, and that was to transfer parts of East Donegal, which were populated by Protestants, to Northern Ireland. Now there's 2 important points to be made here. One, if South Armagh had been transferred to the Irish Free State, it's estimated that up to 5,000 people would not have been involved in the Troubles. And I think the total number of people who were killed in South Armagh during the Troubles was something like 500 or so. Potentially those 500 lives would have been saved, because South Armagh wouldn't be part of Northern Ireland. But the Irish Free State were totally embarrassed by the proposal to transfer East Donegal to Northern Ireland, because that would mean, in effect, that they were giving up the territory, the 26 counties, a part of the territory of the 26 counties, which they had fought a war of independence against the British in previous years, and they just couldn't do it. So the net effect was that the Free State government approached the British government with the acquiescence of the Northern Ireland government, and the Boundary Commission report of 1925 was buried. It was so embarrassing that it was buried, and all 3 governments agreed to stick to the 6 county boundary as set up by the Government of Ireland Act. And of course that is what remains today, the boundary between the North and the South. And the Boundary Commission report of 1925 remained buried, out of sight, until it was finally published as late as 1969. So the Boundary Commission is interesting. Attempts to do away with the viability of Northern Ireland were resisted by Craig and the Unionist government, but the total embarrassment was in the Free State side when it proposed that East Donegal should be transferred to Northern Ireland, and they just couldn't countenance that because they believed that if they agreed to that, they would lose the next general election to De Valera and the Sinn Féin Republicans.
Well, what would your view be on Churchill promising De Valera, or not promising him, at least at the outbreak of the Second World War, having a look again at the Boundary Commission or Ulster?
Well, it went further than that. My understanding is in 1940, Churchill offered De Valera Northern Ireland if, in fact, he would come in on the side of the Allies. But De Valera, sensible and wily politician that he was, knew that this was more rhetoric than anything else, that in order for Northern Ireland to be transferred to the Republic of Ireland, or sorry, the Irish Free State as it was then, and for Irish reunification to take place, that would need the agreement of the Northern Ireland government to abolish itself. And as that was very highly unlikely to be forthcoming, he rejected Churchill's offer of immediate reunification if the Free State came in with the Allies at the beginning of the Second World War. So it was a non-starter. But but it did actually increase the paranoia of Northern Ireland, or the Northern Ireland Unionists themselves, you know, when they thought that they really ran the risk of even their friends, Churchill and the Conservatives in London, handing them over to the Free State in the interests of British security. See, the Northern Ireland Unionists, and this has been a characteristic ever since before the First World War, have always been extremely suspicious of British governments.
With good reason.
Even governments consisting of their friends in the Conservative Party. I mentioned before that one of the reasons why they wanted Northern Ireland under the Government of Ireland Act, a separate state, a separate parliament, separate security structure, etc., is because they could control it themselves. Their great fear was that if they agreed to remain part of the United Kingdom and were ruled directly from London, some government in the future, and they were scared of a Labour government doing this in the 1920s, would just hand them back to the Free State without actually seeking the consent of the Northern Ireland people. So having a government, having their own state, gave them, as they saw, an extra piece of insurance against being peremptorily dismissed from the United Kingdom. They were slow to actually latch onto this because, as I said, as late as 1918, the Unionists' intention and ambition was that they be treated in exactly the same way as Leicestershire or Cornwall or Northumberland or wherever it might be, i.e. directly ruled from London. And I went to a talk at the Irish Embassy, I think it was on the issue of the Third Home Rule Bill, and the former Taoiseach John Bruton made a very, very valid point. And he said that if the state of Northern Ireland, as opposed to Northern Ireland itself just remaining part of the United Kingdom, if the state with its government structure, its departments, its police, its security, etc., if that hadn't been set up, London would have to deal directly with Northern Ireland, and the discrimination against Catholics wouldn't have taken place, or certainly not to the same extent as it was allowed to take place under a unionist-dominated Stormont government, because the British, of course, having washed their hands of the whole affair in the 1920s, were more than content just to allow the Northern Ireland Parliament to get on and deal with Northern Ireland as they saw fit. I thought that was a very, very valid point. If Northern Ireland to be ruled directly from London with no Stormont, no government, no security services operated by the government in Northern Ireland, discrimination against Catholics would not have taken place to the same extent.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a couple more questions. I'm just going to move to Sandra's question. She's asking, would Scottish independence have an effect on a unified Ireland?
We're coming up to the present again, are we? What can I say? Well, we'd be left with a united kingdom of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and I presume that would be grist to the mill of those people who wanted to see the reunification of Ireland, but I don't think it would make any difference to the Protestant populations in Northern Ireland's determination to remain part of the United Kingdom. So even if Scotland went its own way, it wouldn't mean that a substantial number of Protestants in Northern Ireland would say, yeah, the game's up. We better make the best deal we can with the Republic of Ireland and agree to Irish reunification. So I don't think Scottish independence is going to mean or accelerate the establishment of a unified or reunified Ireland. I can't see that.
Thank you, Ivan. Okay, so we also have a question here. The person is, their name is P. Little, so I'm guessing that's your surname. You described the 1920 Act as a pragmatic solution to solve the problem of the Unionists in the North, with many seeing it as a temporary situation. Why did they regard it as such at the time, when 100 years later it still stands?
Well, that's the remarkable thing, isn't it? I mean, you know, I say in the opening chapter, I say, if you had said in December 1920 to any Ulster Protestant that this new state that's about to be set up will be in existence in 10 years' time, they would have thought you were mad. If you had said to any Irish person or any British person in 1912 that Ireland as part of the United Kingdom in 10 years' time would be semi-detached as a dominion of the British Empire, divided between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and that Northern Ireland would be a Home Rule Parliament with its own government in Belfast, they would have thought you were bonkers. The likelihood of that coming to pass was as remote in 1912 as anything that they could dream of in terms of the constitutional arrangements for Ireland. But 10 years later, it happened. And again, when Partition was set up, maybe one of the reasons why we're not commemorating the Government of Ireland Act to any great extent is now, I'm talking about in December 2020, is because at the time it wasn't seen as any great shakes. It was, you know, a pragmatic problem to solve a local difficulty. And once, you know, the heat dies down, we can then begin to get to grips with a solution to the whole of the Irish question. But certainly no Ulster Unionists, no matter how much they wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom and to remain out of Home Rule, could see a separate Northern Ireland remaining until 1932, 1942, and certainly not until 2020. You know, and I hope that's one of the things that's looked at when we come to the commemoration of the establishment of Northern Ireland in May, June next year. How has this lasted? You know, how has it lasted 100 years when nobody, even its friends, even those who supported it, thought it would last any more than a year or two in 1920? It's a fascinating topic.
Thank you, Ivan. Well, we've got time for one more question. So if there's anyone who wants to sort of raise their hand, if Fiona and Nolette can scan around. Oh, yeah, I can see two. Oh, we'll have to make it two. I can see Noreen and I can see a lady where it says John Smith. So
Teresa. Yeah.
Teresa? Okay, can I go to Teresa and then we'll come to Noreen afterwards?
And Mary Hayes, if there is time, Elisa, Mary Hayes had her hand up too.
Okay, so Teresa then, please.
Yeah, I was just going to comment about the pragmatic solution. Could we compare it to David Cameron calling a referendum as a pragmatic solution to deal with his own party?
Except the pragmatic solution in 1920 was a success. You know, well, the fact that it's here, no matter what you think of Northern Ireland, the fact that it's here 100 years later means it must have had something going for itself. And it certainly saved Lloyd George's bacon, because here's a prime minister 100 years ago, I'll come on to Cameron in a minute, a prime minister 100 years ago who's been pulled in all different directions. Remember, he's the prime minister of a coalition government, but 3/4 of that coalition government consists of Conservative MPs. He may be a Liberal, but he's in charge of a Conservative-dominated government. The friends of the Conservative-dominated government are the Ulster Unionists, so he's being pulled in that direction to look after the interests of Ulster Unionists. He's also being pulled in the opposite direction. The escalating violence in the remainder of Ireland is causing Britain's name to be reviled throughout, not only in this country as well, with the press and MPs and the church, etc., but also throughout the wider world as well. The United States are furious about the way that the Irish situation is being dealt with by Lloyd George. Of course, the United States government is under pressure from a strong Irish community in the United States. The dominions, by which I mean New Zealand, Canada, Australia, South Africa, are extremely concerned that what they saw as the justifiable political demands of Irish nationalism are being dealt with such brutality and such cruelty. So Britain's reputation is being damaged. Lloyd George is extremely worried about what's going to happen to the empire after the First World War. As we know it, effortlessly metamorphosed from empire into Commonwealth. But, he was concerned, as were others, that the empire could disappear. And one of the factors that could lead to Australia and Canada saying, well, we've had enough of this, is the way that Britain was treating the population, the nationalist population of Ireland, particularly bearing in mind that in both of those countries, there were strong Irish populations who were putting pressure on their government as well. So you could see, excuse me, where David Lloyd George is coming from. He's been pulled in all sorts of different directions. And this pragmatic solution is something he latches onto to give himself breathing space until he can recover, and hopefully the heat will die down. Cameron, no Lloyd George. Lloyd George, the ultimate pragmatist. He knew what he was doing. Well, certainly he gave the impression that he knew what he was doing. That cartoon is a classic example of the Welsh wizard at work. But Cameron and Brexit, it's the classic example of unintended consequences, isn't it?
But I guess my thought is they both left a problem for future generations to live with.
It's a problem if you think Northern Ireland's a problem, isn't it? I mean, if you're an Irish nationalist, you think the solution, in inverted commas, of partition was a problem. But if you're an Ulster Unionist, you think that it solved the problem. I mean, the Ulster Unionists, one of the reasons why they refused to get involved in the Boundary Commission was because they said, no, the Irish issue has been solved. The Government of Ireland Act set up Northern Ireland. It set up another parliament in Dublin. If you in Dublin refuse to accept that parliament, that's your lookout. It's nothing to do with us. But we have our own 6-county state here in Northern Ireland, and we're not going to be budged. So it depends where you're coming from, how you view partition and the long-term impact of partition. I mean, there are arguments, well, I won't go into them now, but all I'll say is that it does depend on how you view Irish politics and Ireland's relationship with this country. The criticism of Cameron, of course, is that he went into it completely oblivious to the possible consequences of it the vote going the wrong way, and he didn't have any alternative strategy. Whether or not, you know, he's created a problem for others to resolve, again, that depends on where you come from politically. If you're a Brexiteer and you think we're about to march into the, you know, the sunny uplands of economic and political independence, and Britain is reclaiming its rightful position in the world, you will think that Cameron, you know, did the right thing, and he hasn't created a problem. He's unleashed us. He's, you know, restored our freedoms, etc., etc. If you come at it from the opposite point of view, you'll think it's the greatest disaster since Suez or whatever it might be. So the perception of partition and the perception of Brexit all depends on what your politics are and how you view the relationship, in the case of partition, of Britain with Ireland, and in the case of Brexit, of Britain with Europe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we go to Noreen now, and then we'll go on to Mary Hayes afterwards. So just two more there for you, Ivan, please.
Yeah.
Let's just wait. Noreen, I think she needs to come off mute.
Lovely, quite wonderful.
That's fine. You're off mute, Noreen.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Okay. I'm somewhere else. Well, okay, I'll try and
ask away.
Okay, I will ask away. First, what influence did the First World War have on that partition lasting for so long?
What influence did the First World War have on partition lasting for so long?
It lasted so long, because the First World War, they just left it, didn't they? Nobody was interested in doing very much about it because England were so tied up in fighting that war. And that's how I see it. Maybe that it was just left and not dealt with.
It's the changes that took place in Britain and Ireland in the First World War that I went through, you know, 1916, the Sinn Féin victory in 1918, that changed the picture completely. But, you know, go back to 1914, the Third Home Rule Bill was passed, but it was passed as long as it had, at some stage in the future, special treatment for Ulster. Now, you don't need to be a genius to work out that the only special treatment that they were interested in was being treated differently from the remainder of Ireland. So the elements of partition that were coming together, whether it involved a separate Northern Ireland state or not, is debatable. But, you know, partition was being talked about even before the First World War. In fact, you can go back to the Home Rule debates of the late 19th century to see references being made to partition. Interestingly, the first proposal to partition Ireland came in the second reading of the Third Home Rule Bill in 1912, when a Liberal backbench MP, Thomas Agar Roberts, he was later killed a few years later at the Somme, I think it was. Anyway, he stood up in Parliament and said that I propose that the 4 northeastern counties of Ireland be exempt from the Home Rule Bill. No, the response of everybody was, oh, horror, you know, horror. The Liberals didn't want it. The Irish Nationalists certainly didn't want it. The Irish Unionists didn't want it because they wanted to use Unionist opposition to Home Rule to keep the whole of Ireland out of Home Rule. They didn't want bits of Ireland being treated separately. But the first proposal ever to be discussed in the House of Commons was as early as 1912. I suppose what I'm saying is that partition would have taken place irrespective of the First World War. It would have happened. It would have happened anyway, yeah.
Okay, there's just one more thing for me to finish.
Yeah.
What now? You see Northern Ireland as it is now. And I am not talking about politicians. I am talking about the grassroots. the ordinary Catholics and the ordinary Protestants. The way I see it is the only thing that they have to come together at that level, or nothing will happen. They have to learn to accept each other at grassroots level, or nothing will happen. This will go on forever.
Well, I agree with you entirely, and that's why I said earlier on, before we start talking about the reunification of Ireland, maybe we should be looking at, you know, the reunification of hearts and minds inside Northern Ireland itself. 20 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, and we're not one step forward than we were in 1998. So, yeah, I mean, nobody could disagree with that. But equally, you know, when the general election takes place in Northern Ireland, who wins the election?
Unionists, because they're a majority.
So, yeah, sorry, I phrased that wrong. Who are the biggest parties?
Sinn Féin and
Sinn Féin and the DUP.
DUP, yeah.
Yeah, the extremes of Northern Ireland politics.
Exactly.
So how do you reconcile that? This is a sort of general question. How do you reconcile that? That we all want Northern Ireland people to be talking to each other and be tolerant of each other's differences and all the rest of it. But when it comes to actually voting for governments, they actually go out and vote for the two extremes of both communities. That's a contradiction on the face of it, isn't it?
It is a contradiction, yes. And when you think of young people growing up there now, this has to give somewhere. And this does have to give somewhere. It's changing. The unionists are becoming less powerful. DUP is less powerful than it was. And Sinn Féin might be a bit more. So maybe if it evens up a bit and the people come together at grassroots level and take one good look at them and tell them all where to go.
Well, but these are the same people who vote for parties of both extremes. It's a fact of life, you know. And whether or not it's going to change, I don't know.
There has been a swing to the centre, hasn't there, with the Alliance Party doing extremely well and the SDLP making a comeback.
Yeah.
But
I'm very conscious that we have Mary still waiting, and
I'll come out now. Do you want to go to Mary and get her
just
in?
in fairness, could we move? Mary, are you still there? Mary Hayes, please. Very quiet.
Mary, can you unmute yourself? Fiona, can you unmute her?
I can't. She's going to have to unmute herself. I've invited her to.
Yeah, I can't see Mary from here.
Oh, Mary.
Yes.
Okay, is that better now? Yeah, for Dr. Gibbons. Would the Irish language, our native language, help to have any influence, even in the future, in unifying the island of Ireland? It was done to promote the language.
But the Irish language is seen by most Ulster Unionists, most, not all, as the language that's spoken in the South by Catholics, Nationalists, Republicans, etc. It's not a bridge across the divide, is it?
Well, isn't there a lot of Gael schools established in the north of Ireland?
Yeah, mostly amongst the nationalist community.
Regard.
Yeah, there's one established in East Belfast, which has unionist Protestant members, but the difficulty about the Irish language is that it's not seen as non-political. It's been weaponized as a battering ram by militants, it's got to be said, in my opinion, to actually use as another stick to beat the Protestants. And as a result, the Protestants see the Irish language not as an opportunity to come together to share a cultural heritage, which is their heritage as well. You know, their names, their place names, etc., are the Irish language. But they don't see that. They see it as a foreign language, which people in Sinn Féin, for example, wish to impose upon their Protestant unionist culture. That's the problem. And until that's changed, if it ever's going to be changed. I can't see the role for the Irish language that you're talking about.
Well, yes, I take it that the difficulty is there. All right. Yeah.
All right.
Right, thank you. Gosh, that hour went very, very quickly. Ivan, you must be exhausted answering all those questions. He's gone on mute. I think we've asked too many questions of him. Can we hand over now to Tom to round off the rest of the evening, please?
Oh, I can do it here. That's it, I think. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes, Tom.
You can, yes. Well, again, thanks, Ivan, for a fantastic evening. It's absolutely delightful to listen to you and to listen to all the participants. Can I thank every one of you for coming along tonight? What a fantastic exchange of questions and answers, and it's so good. Obviously, we may disagree with some of the issues, but nevertheless, it's right to take these issues and discuss them. And I hope you will all buy Ivan's book and have a good read, and then we will obviously get back together again next year when things are much better and brighter. Hopefully we'll be able to meet at the Luton Irish Forum itself, so as we can have another exchange of views on, I'm sure, a different topic. But nevertheless, it'll also be about Ireland in some way or other. I am hopeful, obviously, that with the younger generation and work going on with the younger generations, that there will be changes. It will take some time, but that's where I think the future lies. Anyway, thanks to everybody for coming along. Those I won't see before Christmas, can I wish you a very happy Christmas and a very safe New Year. Thanks very much. Again, Ivan, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Anybody hear all that?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Ivan.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks.
Good night, Ivan. Take care.
Good night now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ivan.
Brilliant. Brilliant.